Joe and Kim's whirlwind romance was like a fairy tale. From the moment their eyes met across a crowded room, they knew they had found something special in each other. The 12-year age gap between them seemed insignificant compared to the depth of their connection. Joe, a successful architect in his prime, was captivated by Kim's vivacious personality and grace. Her passion for life and enthusiasm drew him in. Kim, an aspiring interior designer, was charmed by Joe's confidence and stability. His calm presence made her feel safe and loved like never before. After just 6 months of dating, Joe surprised Kim with a romantic proposal during a weekend getaway to the mountains. He rented a secluded cabin with a stunning view of the majestic peaks. They had a great time from morning to night, eating delicious food for $40 a portion, hiking in the mountain area, almost falling into an icy stream. In general, it was fun. As they sat on the private balcony watching the sunset, he got down on one knee and held out a ring with a huge diamond. With tears of joy in her eyes, Kim said yes, without hesitation. They got married in an intimate ceremony surrounded by their closest family and friends. It was a beautiful day, the beginning of their happy life together. Seeking a fresh start, Joe and Kim decided to leave the big city and settled in the charming town of Willowbrook. They found a sleepy Victorian house on a quiet street lined with shady trees that had huge potential. Sure, it needed some work, but they were excited to turn it into their cozy love nest. Joe immediately envisioned converting the attic into a home office overlooking the garden and creating an awesome barbecue area in the backyard itself. Kim enthusiastically made plans for designing the perfect kitchen to cook her signature dishes. The first few weeks in their new home were pure domestic bliss. Joe threw himself into DIY projects, reviving the cracked walls and worn floors. Kim focused on decorating and creating beauty, filling each room with thoughtfully curated treasures from local antique shops. Her design talent transformed their modest abode into a work of art. The renovations cost a pretty penny, which left Joe and Kim not so much upset about possibly overpaying, but worried that nothing would break. But then the plumbing problem started. It began with the kitchen faucet, an old-fashioned brass fixture that Joe thought added character. But one morning, as Kim was making her morning coffee, it suddenly started hissing and leaking, splashing water everywhere. Kim suggested calling Joe's friend Carl, who happened to be a plumber. Joe found it a bit odd that she insisted on having Carl come over, instead of just calling a regular plumber, but he initially brushed it off. Carl, muscular, a bit rough around the edges but good-natured, came over and quickly fixed the faucet. Kim thanked him profusely and even sent him off with a batch of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. Joe chuckled, saying she went a bit overboard for a simple faucet repair. Little did he suspect, this was just the beginning of what would soon arouse his suspicions and shatter their domestic harmony. Over the next few months, that damn kitchen faucet broke again and again, and each time Kim immediately called Carl to come fix it, often without even telling Joe beforehand. At first, Joe didn't think much of it, assuming she just trusted his plumbing skills. But then he started noticing little things that gave him an uneasy feeling, like how Kim got dizzy and couldn't even get out of bed. But then she lit up when Carl was around, which was really weird. She laughed too hard at his dumb jokes and bantered with an ease Joe had never seen from her. There were furtive glances and accidental touches between them that seemed inappropriately intimate. Joe's stomach twisted, but he tried to brush it off, thinking he was being paranoid. But then the bathroom sink started acting up too, and the shower head that sprayed in all directions. There was always something, and Kim always wanted to call Carl for help instead of just letting Joe handle it. By this point, he was over at their house multiple times a week, sometimes staying longer than seemed necessary to complete the job. Kim made him lemonade, and they chatted and giggled together as he worked, as if Joe wasn't even there. Joe's uneasy feeling grew. He tried bringing it up with Kim once, suggesting they were relying on Carl more than needed. She vehemently rejected the notion, accusing him of having a jealous imagination. It led to their first real fight, after which the tension in their relationship only increased. Everything came to a head on that fateful day when Joe came home early from work, planning to surprise Kim with flowers and expensive alcohol, since things had been rocky between them lately. He thought a romantic gesture might help smooth things over, but he was the one in for a nasty shock. He walked in to find Kim and Carl going at it right on the kitchen table, next to the leaky faucet. Betrayal, rage, despair. A tidal wave of emotions crashed over Joe. Curses poured out of him. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The woman he loved more than life itself, in the arms of another man in their own home. In that instant, his world shattered, all his hopes and dreams suddenly smashed to pieces. He dropped the flowers, clenched his fist, nearly hitting Carl, who ran in fear to the corner by the fridge, while Kim sank to the floor in a fetal position, out of fear. Joe wanted to destroy everything in that kitchen, from the dishes to the refrigerator that he imagined toppling onto Carl. There was no limit to his fury, but he just turned and left, slamming the front door behind him. Kim ran after him, yanking on her clothes, desperately trying to explain. She begged him to stop, tears streaming down her face, but Joe was in no mood to hear her excuses. He jumped in the car and just drove, with no destination in mind, hot tears pouring down his cheeks. He felt like his chest was gaping open with a raw wound, hemorrhaging pain and raw emotions. After hours of aimless driving, Joe found himself at a dive bar on the outskirts of town. He needed something strong to numb the pain. Sitting there sipping whiskey, he scrolled through his phone contacts, wondering who he could reach out to. He couldn't bear the thought of being alone right now. Then he saw Lara's name, Kim's childhood best friend. On a whim, he dialed her number and poured his heart out, choking on the words between sobs. She listened patiently, then suggested meeting up to talk more. Desperate for support, he agreed, not suspecting that decision would only complicate the situation further. They talked for as long as they could, each glass of alcohol adding to the heat and lowering Joe's comprehension of the conversation. After another glass, with the words, "What a she," he passes out and falls right into Lara's lap. She calls a cab and takes him to the nearest hotel, where he will sleep until morning. The morning already started badly, with a hangover, and then there was Kim. Having decided to go out for some fresh air, Joe met Lara in a quiet coffee shop on the outskirts of town. As soon as he saw the pity in Lara's eyes, he lost it. The floodgates opened and he wept uncontrollably, recounting the horrible details of what he had witnessed, his body shaking with the force of his emotions. Lara held his hand and handed him tissues, letting him get it all out, although inside she felt guilty. When Joe finally pulled himself together, Lara dropped a bombshell. Kim's infidelity was no secret to her. She had known for months, ever since she accidentally saw Kim and Carl together in an intimate setting. But Kim had begged her to keep quiet, saying it was a one-time mistake and that she would tell Joe herself. She threatened to cut Lara out of her life completely if she breathed the word to him. Lara apologized for deceiving him. He could tell her conscience had been eating at her for keeping the secret. They ended up talking for hours, moving from the cafe to the nearest park bench when the coffee shop closed. It was so easy for Lara to open up to him. She had always had a soft spot for him, if she was being honest. She was an incredible listener, and seemed to truly understand his pain, comforting him when he needed it most. In a moment of shared vulnerability and heightened emotions, one thing led to another. And that night they ended up in bed together at Joe's hotel. The next morning a wave of guilt washed over Joe. What had he done? His life was already a disaster, and now he had only further complicated the situation by sleeping with his wife's best friend. How could he condemn Kim for her infidelity, then turn around and do the same thing? He was a hypocrite. Lara assured him it was okay, that everyone makes mistakes when grieving, and no one needed to know. But he knew he would have to confront Kim. No, they would both have to face what they had done. When Joe returned home, Kim was utterly distraught. Her eyes were red and puffy, her hair disheveled as if she hadn't slept all night. She immediately rushed to him, clinging to him and muttering incoherent apologies through her tears. She begged for forgiveness, swore she would never see or speak to Carl again, and promised their marriage would be strong. A small part of Joe wanted to believe her. He still loved her despite everything, but then he noticed a hickey on her neck that he certainly hadn't put there. He laughed bitterly, realizing that even now, amidst her tearful apologies, she was still lying to him. The image of Lara lying in his arms flashed through his mind, eliciting a fresh wave of guilt and shame. So he looked Kim straight in the eye and calmly said, "I slept with Lara last night." All color drained from Kim's face and she started shaking with rage. She lunged at Joe, pummeling his chest with her fists and screaming insults. calling him a hypocrite. He just stood there and took it, feeling oddly numb. When Kim's anger subsided, Joe told her in no uncertain terms that their marriage was over and he would be contacting a divorce lawyer in the morning. She threatened to take him for everything he had, to publicly smear his name, to make him regret ever crossing her. Her vindictive side emerged in full force. Joe just shook his head and walked away, unable to continue this painful conversation. He went to a hotel and decided to start piecing his life back together. Joe and Kim's divorce proceedings were surprisingly swift and relatively conflict-free, despite Kim's threats of revenge. Perhaps she realized her own infidelity left her with little moral high ground to demand much in the divorce. They split their joint assets nearly 50-50 and went their separate ways. Joe rented a small but cozy apartment near his new job. At first, it felt strange to live alone after so many years of marriage. But gradually he began to find upsides to it. No one chastised him if he stayed late at the office or met up with friends after work. He could watch his favorite movies and shows without snide comments. And most importantly, no more lies, exhausting suspicions, and guilt. Joe threw himself into his work, trying to avoid his empty apartment as much as possible. He took on extra projects, spoke at conferences, flew on business trips. Colleagues joked he had become a workaholic, but Joe just wanted to fill the void that had formed in his life. Plus, the career successes helped boost his self-esteem after the marriage imploded. On the rare free evenings, Joe met up with Lara. At first, it was awkward for both of them after the night they spent together, but soon the friendly interaction resumed. Lara supported Joe, helped him settle into his new life, kept him company on walks and at cafes. Gradually, Joe began to realize he was drawn to her as more than a friend. He recalled her soft touches, the taste of her lips, but each time he stopped himself. It was too soon. He hadn't recovered from the divorce yet. One evening, as they lingered at a restaurant, Joe decided to broach the subject. Slightly embarrassed, he said he valued Lara tremendously as a friend, but sometimes thought about more. That maybe in the future, when he was ready for a new relationship, they could try being a couple. If she wanted that too, of course. Lara placed her hand over his and smiled warmly. She said she completely understood. That after a divorce, it takes time to learn to trust again. That she also enjoyed being with him, but wasn't quite ready for a serious relationship either. But if someday in the future they both wanted to be together, she would be more than happy to. For now, let things unfold naturally. Joe exhaled with relief and gratefully squeezed her hand. How nice to be understood without extra words. A few months passed. Joe had gotten used to his new bachelor status and was enjoying a calm, steady life. But suddenly, this idyll was shattered by Kim's reappearance. One evening she showed up at his apartment, drunk and angry. She started yelling that he had ruined her life, that she had lost everything because of him, that she wouldn't let him off the hook so easily. Joe tried to reason with her, reminded her they had already settled everything and divided their assets in the divorce. But Kim wasn't listening. She hurled a vase at him, which shattered to pieces. Then she tried to attack him with her fists, but Joe managed to grab her wrists. Kim burst into sobs and went limp. Through her hiccups, she wailed that she still loved him, that she wanted to start over. Joe silently hugged her, rubbing her back until she calmed down. He understood Kim was hurting and scared right now, but there could be no going back to the past. The next day, Joe changed his locks and installed an alarm system. He was worried Kim might pull something else. And he was right. Over the following weeks, she bombarded him with angry messages and letters, accusing him of every mortal sin. She wrote nasty things on his Facebook page. Once she even came to his work and made a scene in front of colleagues and clients. Security escorted her out, but the unpleasant aftertaste remained. Joe held strong. He ignored Kim's hysterics, deleted her messages, explained the situation to his colleagues and bosses. He decided not to go to the police for now, hoping Kim would settle down with time. Only with Lara could he share his worries. She supported him as always and gave wise advice. Said that Kim craved attention more than anything right now, so the best thing Joe could do was ignore her antics. Sooner or later, she would get bored and leave him alone. Meanwhile, a joyful event occurred in Joe's life. He was promoted to senior project manager. It was a major win, and he celebrated with all his colleagues at a bar. Lara came to congratulate him too. When they were alone, she gently kissed his cheek and said she was proud of him. Her closeness and warmth made Joe's heart ache. He realized he was falling in love with her, and that maybe she felt the same. They started seeing each other more often, no longer just as friends. They went on dates, held hands, kissed. Both felt the thrill and tenderness of getting to know each other anew in this new capacity. Of course, it was a bit scary for both of them to start a new relationship after past failures, but next to each other, they felt confident and calm, as if this was how it was meant to be. Joe was already considering asking Lara to move in together, but hadn't gotten the chance yet. Then one day, a call came from the hospital. Kim had gotten into a serious accident and was in the ICU. It turned out that at the time of the crash she wasn't alone, but with her lover Carl, who died at the scene. By all accounts, Kim had been driving drunk again. Joe experienced conflicting emotions: shock, pity, anger at Kim's recklessness, guilt that he couldn't help her. He went to the hospital and sat in the hallway all night, waiting for news. In the morning, the doctor informed him that Kim had survived, but sustained severe injuries and fallen into a coma. It was unknown if she would fully recover. Joe's life was gradually getting back on track. He thought less and less about Kim and the collapse of their marriage. Of course, it still hurt and stung, but he tried to focus on the positives: his interesting work, loyal friends, newfound freedom. He felt he had grown stronger and wiser after all these upheavals. Perhaps it wasn't an ending, but a new beginning. After the accident, Joe's life split into two parts. On one hand, his relationship with Lara was developing and deepening. They spent almost all their free time together, getting to know each other in new ways. It turned out that in addition to work and friendly hangouts, they shared many common interests and values. They both loved to travel, not just lie on the beach, but to explore the culture and history of new places. Both were into photography and could wander the city for hours looking for the perfect shot. Both dreamed of someday starting their own small business, a cozy cafe or bookstore. Joe felt himself falling more in love with each passing day. He was filled with gratitude and tenderness towards Lara for being by his side, for accepting him with all his flaws and traumas from the past. He wanted to do something special for her, to show the depth of his feelings, and such a chance soon presented itself. It was Lara's birthday. Joe organized a surprise for her, a romantic dinner on a skyscraper rooftop overlooking the city at night. He decorated everything with candles and flowers, ordered her favorite dishes and champagne, and at the end of the evening he gave her a ring, not an engagement ring yet, but as a symbol of his love and serious intentions. Lara was moved to tears. She said she had never felt so happy and loved. They made love right there on the roof, under the starry sky, forgetting about the whole world. But there was another side of Joe's life that he couldn't forget. Kim, lying in a coma in a hospital bed. He visited her almost every day, bringing flowers, reading aloud books she loved. The doctor said it was unknown if she could hear him, but he kept at it anyway, hoping his voice would help bring her back. Sometimes Kim's mother, a grief-stricken elderly woman, joined him. She wept at her daughter's bedside and asked Joe's forgiveness for everything Kim had done. Said only now did she understand how much he had loved her daughter and what a good man he was. Joe comforted her as best he could, promised he wouldn't abandon Kim, that he would take care of her. Lara approached the situation with understanding, although it clearly wasn't easy for her. She didn't want to be second to Kim even now, when Kim lay in a coma. But she saw that for Joe, it was a matter of duty and humanity, not feelings. So she supported him and even went to see Kim herself sometimes, helped take care of her. Gradually, Kim's condition stabilized. She still didn't regain consciousness, but the doctors no longer feared for her life. Hope emerged that she would wake up one day. Joe continued to believe in the best, although he understood that even if Kim woke up, she would never be the same. The injuries were too severe, both physical and psychological. One day, as Joe once again sat by Kim's bedside, he suddenly thought he saw her hand move. He froze, holding his breath. Could it be? But no, he must have imagined it. He leaned back in his chair, disappointed, and then Kim opened her eyes, blinked a few times, looking around the room. Then she stared straight at Joe and whispered through parched lips, "Forgive me." Kim's awakening was a real shock for everyone. Joe felt incredible relief that she was alive and conscious. He wept with joy, squeezing her weak hand. At the same time, he was filled with anxiety. What would happen now? How would he, Kim, and Lara deal with this situation? Kim had a long rehabilitation ahead of her. The physical injuries were gradually healing, but her psyche was more difficult. Kim was plagued by nightmares, panic attacks, guilt over Carl's death. She barely spoke to anyone and stared off into space for long periods. Joe tried to be there for her, to support her, but he understood he couldn't give her everything she needed. Kim required professional help and family support. Kim's mother took over the primary care for her daughter. She practically moved into the hospital with Kim, helped with hygiene, feeding, gave massages. They had long conversations, cried together, prayed. For the first time in many years, mother and daughter truly grew close and were able to forgive each other. Joe visited Kim less often now, every few days. Each time was like a small trial, to see Kim so broken, withdrawn, not at all like her former self. But he considered it his duty to be there, to remind her she wasn't alone. One day, Kim suddenly said, "I'm letting you go, Joe. You need to move on with your life. You deserve to be happy with Lara." Joe burst into tears, burying his face in the hospital blanket. It was both a bitter and sweet feeling, to finally let go of the past and gain freedom. Joe and Lara's wedding was quiet and modest, just for the closest loved ones. They signed the papers at City Hall, then had dinner with family. Both were glowing with happiness and couldn't take their eyes off each other. They knew a difficult path lay ahead, but they were ready to walk it together, supporting and inspiring one another. Kim wasn't at the wedding. She was still recovering from the accident. But she sent the newlyweds a touching letter, wishing them many years of joy and asking both for forgiveness for everything she had done. Joe and Lara were deeply moved. They decided they would definitely visit Kim all together when she was ready for that meeting. Gradually, life fell into a new groove. Joe and Lara bought a cozy little house in the suburbs and began setting up their family nest. A year later, they had an adorable baby girl whom they named Hope. Joe turned out to be a wonderful father, patient, caring, always ready to play or read a fairy tale. He often thought of his own father and wished he could see him now, a grown man, strong, walking through life with a faithful partner by his side. Meanwhile, Kim was also learning to live anew. After being released from the hospital, she went through a rehabilitation program at a special center. There she got seriously involved in painting, something she had dreamed of since childhood but had abandoned. Turned out, she had real talent. Through pain and colors, she learned to accept herself and let go of the past. Gradually, more and more light and hope began to appear in her paintings. One day, Kim opened her own exhibition in the city. Joe and Lara came to the opening with their daughter. Kim embraced them like family, showered the little one with kisses. They stood for a long time by each painting, discussing the colors and meanings, and then they sat in a cafe and talked about everything: the past and future, pain and hope, redemption, and the ability to move forward. In that moment, they all felt that the terrible pages of their story were finally turned. Ahead lay only a blank page and a new, unpredictable, but beautiful life.